The letter arrived on a Tuesday in February, which is the most ordinary kind of day for your life to come apart at the seams. I was standing in the kitchen of my apartment in Harlow when I opened it. Still in my work clothes, bag on the floor where I dropped it, keys in my free hand. The return address was from a collections firm in Charlotte. I didn't know anyone in Charlotte. I didn't have any outstanding debt. I'd spent the better part of 6 years making sure of that, paying down my student loans ahead of schedule, keeping one credit card with a zero balance, building a savings account that my mother called unnecessarily cautious and that I called the only thing standing between me and the version of my life my family had already planned for me. The letter said I owed $214,000. Not a typo. Not a billing error. $214,000, principal and accrued interest on a small business loan taken out 31 months earlier, secured by my signature, my social security number, and my credit history. I had never signed that loan. I didn't find out until later that my mother had been the one to sign it. That she had practiced my handwriting on a legal pad for 3 days before she walked into that bank. That my father had sat in the car outside and waited. That my sister Cassandra had been the one to cash the disbursement check and spend every dollar of it within 14 months on a boutique clothing store in Raleigh that closed 18 months after it opened, leaving behind a locked door, 37 Instagram posts, and $214,000 in debt that now had my name on it. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started, because the forgery was just the final act of a performance that had been running my entire life. My name is Nora Whitfield. I am 34 years old. I am a licensed CPA with a firm in Harlow, North Carolina, and for the past 6 years I have lived quietly, carefully, and completely off my family's radar, which is exactly where they wanted me. If you're new here and this is already landing somewhere close to home, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I genuinely love knowing who's out there with me. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand the pattern before you can understand what happened when it finally broke. My parents, Gerald and Sandra Whitfield, had 2 daughters. Cassandra, the older one by 4 years, and me. I want to be careful here, because I've spent a long time trying to be fair to the people who raised me. My parents were not monsters. They were not cold or violent or absent. They showed up to school events. They kept the house warm. My father coached Little League for 6 years even after both his daughters made it clear they had no interest in baseball. My mother made dinner most nights, kept the calendar, remembered everyone's birthdays, and spent more energy organizing her family's life than most people spend on anything. The problem was not that they didn't love us. The problem was the way they loved us, unevenly, transparently, and with a logic they never once questioned. Cassandra was the golden child. I know that phrase gets used loosely, but I mean it in the precise, structural sense. Every resource in our household flowed toward Cassie first. Every decision was filtered through how it would affect Cassie. Every sacrifice asked of the family was justified by what Cassie needed, what Cassie deserved, what Cassie was going to become. Cassie was going to be a fashion designer. From the time she was 16 and sewed her first dress from a YouTube tutorial, my mother spoke about Cassie's future in the fashion industry the way people speak about a destiny already written. She enrolled Cassie in a private design program at 19. When the program cost more than the budget allowed, they withdrew from my college savings fund, the one my grandmother had contributed to for 11 years, to cover the balance. Nobody asked me. I found out when I called the financial aid office at the state university I'd been accepted to and was told my expected family contribution had changed. I was 17. I cried once, in the bathroom, with the fan on. Then I applied for every scholarship I could find, took out the minimum in federal loans, worked 20 hours a week at a campus coffee shop, and graduated in 4 years with a 3.9 GPA and a degree in accounting. My parents did not attend my graduation. Cassie had a fashion show in Charleston that weekend, a student showcase at the design program she was now in her 3rd year of. My mother sent a card with a gift card inside. My father texted, "Proud of you, kid. Sorry we can't make it." Cassie's show is really important for her future. I drove home alone, changed out of my gown in the parking garage, and called my grandmother, Nora Whitfield, from the front seat of my car. She answered on the second ring. "I know they didn't come," she said, before I could say anything. Her voice was steady and a little fierce. "I want you to know that I am proud of you. What you've done yourself. Don't let them take that from you." My grandmother was the only person in my family who ever spoke to me that way, directly, without softening, without asking me to make peace with something that wasn't peaceful. She had tried, over the years, to say things to my parents. I know this because she told me. She told my mother that the imbalance in how they treated their daughters was going to cost them something they couldn't afford to lose. My mother's response, according to Vera, was, "Nora is resilient. She doesn't need the same kind of support Cassie does. Some children are just built that way." I've turned that sentence over in my mind more times than I can count. Some children are just built that way. As if my capacity to absorb neglect was a trait to be leveraged rather than a wound requiring attention. As if the fact that I kept going was evidence that nothing had been taken from me at all. I moved to Harlow at 23, took a junior position at an accounting firm, and spent the next 6 years building a life that was entirely my own. I had a small apartment. I had colleagues who respected me. I had a running habit and a bookshelf I was proud of and a savings account that grew quietly and steadily every single month. I went home for Christmas and Thanksgiving and birthdays, because leaving a family entirely is harder than anyone who hasn't tried it will ever understand. But I kept my distance. I kept my finances separate. I kept my mouth closed about things that hurt because opening it had never once changed anything. Cassie, in those years, launched 3 businesses. A clothing line that lasted 8 months. An Etsy shop that she closed when it became, in her words, too much admin. And then, 31 months before that Tuesday letter arrived in my kitchen, the boutique. She called it Cass & Company. It was in the Riverside district of Raleigh, a neighborhood with good foot traffic and expensive rent. She sent me photos the day it opened. The storefront was beautiful, hand-lettered signage, white walls, curated racks. She had 3 employees and a press mention in a local lifestyle blog and a ribbon-cutting photo that my mother posted on Facebook with the caption, "So proud of my girl. Watch out, Raleigh." I did not comment on the post. I sent Cassie a text that said, "Looks beautiful. I hope it goes well." She left it on read. I did not know how the boutique was funded. I did not know that 6 weeks before the opening, my mother had walked into the branch office of a regional bank in Raleigh and applied for a small business loan of $220,000, using my name, my social security number, and a signature she had rehearsed until it looked like mine. I did not know that the loan was approved, that the funds were disbursed into an account in Cassie's name, that the monthly payments were made for 11 months before they stopped, or that the boutique had quietly closed its doors with 14 months of payments missed and no assets to liquidate. I did not know any of this until a Tuesday in February when a collections letter told me I owed $214,000. The first person I called was not my parents. It was my grandmother. Vera was 81 that winter, still sharp, still living alone in the house she and my grandfather had shared for 47 years. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Something happened," I said. "Tell me." I read her the letter. All of it. The account number, the origination date, the amount. The firm name. The language about legal action. There was a silence that lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Grandma. I'm here." Her voice was different. Lower. Careful. "Nora, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I need you to do 2 things. First, you pull your credit report tonight. All 3 bureaus. Tonight. Okay. Second. I need you to call Martin. Martin Alcott was my grandmother's personal attorney. He had handled her affairs for over 20 years, estate planning, property, a dispute with a contractor in 2019 that he had resolved quickly and without fanfare. I had met him twice, both times at family gatherings where he appeared briefly, shook hands, and left early. He was in his late 60s, quiet, and had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades watching other people make decisions they'll regret. "Why do I need to call Martin?" I asked. Another pause. Shorter this time. "Because Martin has been holding something for me," she said. "Something I've been hoping I wouldn't need to use." It looks like I was wrong to hope. I didn't press her. I pulled my credit report that night, sitting at my kitchen table with a cold cup of tea and a feeling in my chest like standing on ice and hearing it crack underfoot. The loan was there. 31 months of history. My name. My social security number. An address in Raleigh I had never lived at. An origination date I could account for. I had been in Charlotte that week for a client audit. My phone records would show it. My hotel receipts would show it. I had not been anywhere near that bank. The signature was not mine. I knew at the moment I saw the scan of the loan application that I requested from the collections firm. I know my own handwriting. I am an accountant. I spend my professional life in documents. The loops of the N in Nora were wrong. The tail of the W in Whitfield curved in a direction mine never does. Someone had practiced long enough to get close enough to pass a banker's casual review, but not long enough to get it right. I sat with that for a long time. Not with anger, not yet. With something colder. The slow arrival of a truth I had been circling without knowing it for years. All those choices that had been made for me, around me, about me, the college fund, the graduation, the years of being the afterthought in my own family's story, there had always been a logic underneath them. The logic of a family that had decided, somewhere along the way, that Nora's resources were available. That Nora's name was a tool that could be picked up and used and set back down. They had borrowed from my future before. They had taken from my savings before. They had made decisions that carried my name without asking me before. This was just the first time they had needed a lawyer to do it. I met Martin Alcott at his office on a Thursday morning. The office was in a low building off Main Street in my grandmother's town, 40 minutes from Harlow. He met me at the door himself, no receptionist, no waiting room delay. He looked the same as I remembered. Quiet suit, good shoes, the kind of face that has learned to give very little away. "Your grandmother called me," he said. "I know." We sat across from each other at a wide desk that held almost nothing. A legal pad. A pen. A closed manila folder. "Before we begin," he said, "I want you to know that I have been advising your grandmother to come to you with this for over a year. She wanted to wait. She believed your parents might correct course on their own. She was, I think, protecting them as much as she was protecting you." "What's in the folder?" He opened it. Inside were 37 pages. Bank statements, a loan application, a notarized letter from a forensic document examiner in Charlotte, a private investigator's report dated 14 months earlier, and a chain of email correspondence between my mother, my father, and a branch manager at the Raleigh bank. Martin let me read. He didn't speak. He refilled my water glass once, quietly, and went back to his chair. My mother had not acted alone. My father had known. The emails made that clear, a thread of 14 messages in which my father asked twice whether there was another way, and my mother responded both times with variations of the same argument: "Cassie needs this. Nora won't miss it. She's careful with money. She can manage. She would want to help if we asked, but she'd make it complicated. It's simpler this way. She would want to help if we asked." I read that sentence 3 times. Then I kept reading. My grandmother had hired the investigator 11 months earlier, after noticing an irregularity in a financial document that Cassie had left at the house during a visit. Vera had said nothing to my parents. She had said nothing to me. She had taken the document to Martin, asked him to look into it quietly, and waited for my parents to confess, for Cassie to come forward, for some version of accountability to arrive on its own. None had. And now a collections firm in Charlotte was sending letters to my apartment in Harlow, and my name was attached to $214,000 in defaulted debt, and my credit score, which I had spent 6 years building with the careful, deliberate patience of someone who understood that a good credit score is one of the only things a person with no family money can use as a foundation, had dropped 41 points in the past 90 days. What are my options? I asked. My voice was steady. I had learned, over many years, to keep my voice steady. Martin looked at me with the particular expression of a man who is prepared for this conversation and is choosing his words with precision. You have several, he said. But I want you to understand something first. The evidence in that folder is complete. The forensic analysis of the signature, the email chain, the timeline of the loan and the closure of the business, it is complete and it is documented. What you decide to do with it is entirely your choice. What would you do? He considered this. I would protect myself, he said simply. Everything else is secondary to that. I closed the folder. I looked at the window. Outside, February light was coming through bare oak branches, thin and white and without warmth. My parents had forged my name on $214,000 of debt to fund my sister's dream. They had done it without telling me, without asking me, without a single conversation in which they treated me as a person whose life could be affected by their choices. They had looked at my name and my credit and my careful, quiet 6 years of building something and seen a resource. Not a daughter. A resource. And my grandmother, 81 years old and still, even now, trying to protect everyone at once, had been sitting on the proof for 14 months. I thought about my mother's email. She can manage. She would want to help. I thought about the graduation card with the gift card inside. I thought about the college savings fund and the fashion program and 37 Instagram posts and a locked door in the Riverside district. I thought about Cassandra's face at Christmas, that particular expression she wore when our parents praised her in front of me, not triumphant, exactly, but comfortable. The ease of someone who has never once questioned whether the room they're standing in was built for them. There's going to be a family dinner, I said. Martin looked at me. My parents' anniversary. March 15th. They've already sent the invitation. Both of them, Cassie, my aunt and uncle, my cousin, some of their friends. Maybe 20 people. I see. I'd like to be ready by then. Martin picked up his pen. He pulled the legal pad toward him. Then let's get to work, he said. The 3 weeks between that Thursday in Martin's office and the anniversary dinner were the quietest 3 weeks of my life. Not peaceful. Quiet is different from peaceful. Peaceful is the absence of trouble. Quiet is what happens when you have made a decision so large and so final that the noise of ordinary life stops reaching you. I went to work. I reviewed quarterly reports and reconciled accounts and answered emails. I ran 4 miles every morning before the sun came up, because movement was the only thing that kept my thoughts from circling. I called my grandmother twice a week. I did not call my parents. My mother called me on a Friday, 10 days before the dinner. Just confirming you're coming to the anniversary, she said. She had a particular way of framing invitations as confirmations, as though your attendance had already been decided and she was simply completing the paperwork. It's going to be beautiful. I booked the private room at Hargrove's. Your father and I have been together 35 years. Can you believe it? I'll be there, I said. Wear something nice, Nora. Not one of your work things. Cassie is wearing that new dress she designed. It's really stunning. I noted, without saying anything, that my mother had described the event, confirmed the venue, specified the dress code, and mentioned Cassie's outfit, all within 30 seconds of calling to discuss her own anniversary. I'll find something, I said. Good. Oh, and Nora, don't bring up anything difficult that night. You know how your father gets. It's a celebration. There it was. Already. 10 days early, and she was already building the fence around the evening. Don't bring up anything difficult. A preemptive instruction, delivered in the warm tone she always used when she was managing me. It was the same tone she had used when she told me, the Christmas after the college fund was redirected, that it would mean a lot to everyone if I could be gracious about it. The same tone she used at Cassie's boutique opening when she pulled me aside and said, simply, "Tonight is about your sister. Please. Tonight is about your sister. 34 years of tonight is about your sister. I won't cause any trouble," I said. Which was technically true. After I hung up, I sat on my couch for a while with the phone in my lap. I thought about what my mother knew and what she didn't. She knew the boutique had failed. She knew the loan had defaulted. She almost certainly knew the collections firm had sent letters. The original notices would have gone to the Raleigh address on file, but a woman who had organized the entire scheme would have been watching for them. What she did not know was that her own mother had hired a private investigator 14 months ago. What she did not know was that a manila folder with 37 pages of documentation was sitting in a locked drawer in Martin Alcott's office with my name on it. What she did not know was that I had spent 10 days quietly, methodically, building the legal framework of what came next. Martin had been thorough. He had contacted the bank directly, on my behalf, with a formal letter of dispute and a copy of the forensic signature analysis. He had filed a preliminary fraud report with the relevant authorities. He had drafted a civil demand letter to my parents, not yet sent, held in reserve, outlining the full scope of the liability they had created. He had also, at my request, prepared a single document. A clean, clear, 3-page summary of the facts. The loan origination date. The signature comparison. The email chain. The timeline of the boutique's operation and closure. The current amount owed. My whereabouts on the date of signing, supported by receipts and phone records. 3 pages. Everything a room full of people would need to understand what had been done. I had it printed. I folded it into thirds and put it in an envelope. I put the envelope in my bag. I was not going to that dinner to make a scene. I was going because my mother had told me not to bring up anything difficult, and I had spent 34 years honoring instructions like that. I was going because 20 people who had watched my family for decades deserved to know what had been done in the quiet spaces of it. And I was going because Cassandra, who had spent 31 months building a life on a foundation of someone else's name, had never once, in all that time, picked up the phone to call me. Not once. Not to say she was sorry. Not to say she knew. Not to say anything at all. That silence was its own kind of answer. The day before the dinner, Cassie called. I almost didn't answer. Then I did, because I wanted to hear her voice. I wanted to know if she would say anything. If some part of her, in the final hours before everything changed, would choose honesty over comfort. "Hey," she said. "Just checking you're coming tomorrow." "I'm coming." "Good. Mom's really excited." She went all out with the decorations. A pause. "Are you doing okay? You've seemed kind of distant lately." I have seemed distant. That was what she led with. Not, "I need to tell you something." Not, "There's something I should have said months ago." Just a mild observation about my emotional availability, offered in the tone of someone who considers themselves a concerned sister. "I'm fine," I said. "I'll see you tomorrow, Cassie." "Okay. Love you." "Yep." I hung up. I laid out my clothes for the next evening. A dark green dress, simple cut, nothing my mother could call a work thing. Heels I could walk in. The envelope in my bag, exactly where I'd left it. I called my grandmother before I went to bed. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I think so. Martin will be there." I sat up. "What?" "I invited him. As my guest." Her voice was entirely matter of fact. "He has attended 3 of your parents' anniversaries over the years. It will not seem unusual. But I wanted someone in that room who knows the full picture." I was quiet for a moment. "Grandma. I know what I'm doing, Nora. I've known what I'm doing since I found that document in Cassie's bag 14 months ago. I've been waiting for the right moment. This is the right moment. She paused. Get some sleep. Tomorrow you're going to need to be very calm. I know. And Nora. Her voice shifted. Softer. The voice she used when she was saying something she'd been holding for a while. I should have come to you sooner. I kept thinking they would do the right thing on their own. They didn't. I'm sorry for the time that cost you. I pressed my hand flat against the mattress. Breathe. You're here now, I said. If you've ever been in a room where you know something that no one else knows yet, you understand what the drive to Hargroves felt like. The city moving past the car windows like something from a different life. The ordinary Friday evening traffic, people heading to restaurants and movies and unremarkable dinners that would leave no mark on anyone. And me, driving to my parents' 35th anniversary with an envelope in my bag and a document examiner's report that said my mother had forged my name on $250,000 of debt. I arrived at Hargroves at 7:15. The private room was in the back, warm light, round tables, white linens, a small bar cart in the corner. My mother had done it beautifully. That was always the truth about Sandra Whitfield. She had an eye for occasions. She knew how to make a room feel like a celebration. Candles on every table, a framed photo of her and my father from their wedding day on the sideboard, a small arrangement of white roses that I recognized from the florist she always used for important events. 22 people. My Aunt Renee and Uncle Doug. My cousin Patricia who had driven up from Wilmington. 3 couples from my parents' church group. 2 neighbors who had known our family for decades. My father's colleague from the firm where he'd worked for 20 years. And Cassie, already at the bar with a glass of red wine, wearing the dress she'd mentioned, a deep burgundy wrap design that she had, I had to admit, made beautifully. And Martin Alcott, standing near the entrance with a glass of water, talking quietly to my grandmother, who was seated at the table closest to the door. They both looked up when I came in. My grandmother's eyes held mine for exactly 1 second. Just long enough to say, I see you. I'm here. My mother swept across the room toward me. Nora, you look lovely. She held my face with both hands the way she'd always done. Her perfume was the same as it had been my entire life. I'm so glad you're here. Come say hello to your father. My father was standing by the photo on the sideboard. Gerald Whitfield, 63 years old, retired from 30 years in commercial real estate, a man who had always been more follower than architect in the choices his marriage had made. He hugged me briefly. Good to see you, kiddo. He looked well. Rested. The look of a man who had not been losing sleep. That told me something. Cassie found me 20 minutes later, at the bar. She hugged me with the easy confidence of someone who believes the distance between them and their sibling is just geography. She smelled like the boutique had smelled in its first week, that particular combination of new fabric and expensive candles and optimism. You look great, she said. Thank you. I'm glad you came. Mom was worried you might cancel. Why would I cancel? She shrugged, sipped her wine. You've been quiet lately. We've all noticed. I looked at my sister. 38 years old. Beautiful, genuinely. Smart, in the specific way of people who understand aesthetics and instinct but have never been asked to be accountable. She was looking at me with the mild concern of someone who has done nothing wrong, or, more accurately, someone who has decided that what they've done does not qualify as wrong. I've had a lot on my mind, I said. Well, tonight is about Mom and Dad. Let's just enjoy it. I smiled. I set down my drink. Let's, I said. The dinner was excellent. My mother's taste, as always, was impeccable. 3 courses, beautifully timed. The room hummed with the easy conversation of people who have known each other long enough to be comfortable. My father told the story of their first date twice, once at normal volume and once loudly, for the table at the back, and both times my mother laughed as though she hadn't heard it 300 times before. My Aunt Renee cried a little during the toast, which was exactly like my Aunt Renee. My cousin Patricia, who had always quietly preferred me to Cassie and never made a production of it, sat next to me for most of the meal and talked about her new job and her dog and the renovation she was doing on her bathroom. Normal. Warm. The surface of a family that looked, from any angle except the inside, like something intact. Martin ate quietly at the far table, near my grandmother. He caught my eye once during the main course. A small nod. Nothing more. And then my mother stood up. She had a champagne flute in one hand and the particular posture of a woman who has rehearsed what she is about to say. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about 35 years. She talked about the house they'd built and the children they'd raised and the life that had been, in her words, beyond anything she could have imagined. She talked about Cassie's boutique, past tense, briefly, with the phrase a learning experience that slid past most people in the room without catching. She talked about family. About loyalty. About the way the people in this room had shown up for them over the years. She did not mention me by name. Not once. In a 4-minute toast at her own anniversary dinner, surrounded by people who had known her daughters their entire lives, she did not say my name. I watched the room while she spoke. Aunt Renee smiling. Uncle Doug nodding. Patricia looking at her plate. Martin Alcott with his hands folded, very still. And my grandmother, who was watching me. When my mother sat down to applause, my father stood briefly to add his own toast, shorter, warmer, less rehearsed. He thanked his wife. He thanked his family. He looked at Cassie when he said, "We are so proud of who our children are becoming." He did not look at me. Cassie raised her glass. Smiled that comfortable smile. The applause settled. Dessert arrived. Conversation resumed. And I reached into my bag. The envelope was there, exactly as I'd left it. I didn't take it out yet. I just touched it once, through the leather, the way you touch a railing at the top of a long staircase. To know it's there. To know you're steady. 5 minutes later, my mother looked across the table at me with the warm, slightly proprietary expression she always wore when she had successfully organized an event to her satisfaction. "Nora," she said, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear, "your father and I were just saying, it would mean so much to us if you said a few words. Just something brief. You've always been such a thoughtful speaker." She said it the way she said everything, as a gift. As though the invitation to speak was a favor she was extending. As though my thoughtfulness was a quality she had recognized and was now graciously putting to use. 22 people turned toward me. Including Martin. Including my grandmother, who was holding her champagne glass with both hands and watching me with the absolute stillness of someone who has been waiting a very long time. Including Cassie, who was smiling pleasantly, already half turned back toward Patricia, already moving on. I looked at my mother. Then at my father. Then at the room. I stood up. "Thank you, Mom." My voice was even. I'd actually love to say a few words. I did not look at the envelope yet. I looked at the faces around the tables, the neighbors, the church friends, my aunt and uncle, my cousin, my father's colleague. People who had attended my parents' events for decades. People who had watched me grow up in this family and accepted, without question, the version of me they'd been shown. Quiet Nora. Sensible Nora. Nora who doesn't need as much. Nora who manages. 35 years is a long time, I said. And I think most of the people in this room know my parents well enough to understand what kind of marriage they've built. They've built one where every decision gets made together. Where one person doesn't act without the other knowing. I paused. I've always believed that about them. I believed it until about 3 weeks ago. The room shifted. Not much. A fraction. The way a room shifts when the tone of a speech changes a half step and everyone feels it before they've processed why. My mother's expression didn't move. That was how I knew she understood what was happening. Because a person hearing something harmless would have frowned in mild confusion. She went very still. 3 weeks ago, I said, I received a letter from a collections firm in Charlotte. The letter told me I owed $214,000 on a small business loan taken out 31 months ago. A loan I never applied for. A loan I never signed. A loan that used my name, my social security number, and my credit history, without my knowledge. Complete silence. Not the kind of silence that follows a joke that lands wrong. The kind that follows a statement that rearranges the furniture of a room without touching a single piece. My father's face went the color of old paper. Nora. My mother's voice was low and controlled. This is not the place, you told me not to bring up anything difficult. I kept my voice level. I'm not being difficult. I'm being accurate. I reached into my bag. I took out the envelope. I unfolded the 3 pages and set them on the table in front of me without looking at them, because I didn't need to. I had read them enough times to carry every line. I had the signature on that loan application analyzed by a forensic document examiner. The signature is not mine. I have phone records and hotel receipts that place me in Charlotte on the date of signing, 90 miles from that bank. I looked at my mother. And I have a chain of emails between you, Dad, and the branch manager. 14 messages. I have read all of them. Cassie's wine glass came down on the table with a sound like a small crack. Mom, she said. Her voice had no air in it. My mother looked at Cassie once. A flicker of something, not regret, not quite. More like the look of a woman recalculating a plan that has just encountered an obstacle she didn't anticipate. Then she looked back at me. And what I saw in her face, underneath the careful composure, was not guilt. Not shame. It was something older and more stubborn, the expression of a woman who has always believed that the ends justified the means, encountering for the first time someone willing to say out loud that they didn't. You were going to make it complicated, she said. Quietly. As though this were an explanation. As though this were an answer. The room was so silent I could hear the candles. I looked at my mother for a long moment. I thought about every time she had described me as resilient. Every time she had redirected resources toward Cassie without a conversation, without an apology, without even the acknowledgement that something had been taken. Every you can manage and she needs this more, and tonight is about your sister that I had swallowed and absorbed and carried without complaint because I believed, I had genuinely believed, that a family was something you protected even at cost to yourself. Yes, I said. I would have made it complicated. Because it was wrong. I looked at my father. He was staring at the tablecloth. His hands were flat on either side of his plate, pressed down as though he was trying to keep something from rising. Dad. He looked up. I'm not angry at you. I'm disappointed. There's a difference, and I think you know it. His chin moved. Once. A small, barely visible motion that might have been a nod or might have been the effort of a man trying to hold himself together in front of his own guests. I turned back to the room. 22 people. My aunt with her hand over her mouth. My uncle very still, arms crossed. Patricia watching me with wide, clear eyes. The neighbor from across the street, a woman named Elaine who had brought us casseroles after my grandmother had a hip replacement, staring at the document on the table in front of me with the careful expression of someone putting a very long story together for the first time. And Martin Alcott, 3 tables back, hands still folded, watching with the steady, measured attention of a man who is prepared for this. I folded the pages. I put them back in the envelope. I picked up my champagne glass. 35 years, I said. That is a long time. Long enough to build something real. Long enough to know better. I set the glass down without drinking. I hope you'll use whatever comes next to do that. I picked up my bag. I pushed back my chair. I looked at Cassie once, my sister, who was staring at the tablecloth with her hands in her lap and a face I didn't fully recognize, because I had never seen her look small before. I love this family, I said. To no one in particular. To all of them. I always have. That's why this hurts as much as it does. I walked toward the exit. I did not run. I did not rush. I walked the length of that private room at a steady pace, past the white linens and the candles and the wedding photo on the sideboard and the roses my mother had chosen with her impeccable eye for occasions, and I walked out the door into the ordinary cool air of a Friday evening in March. Behind me, the room stayed silent for a long time. I know because Martin told me later. He said the silence lasted 45 seconds after I left. That nobody moved or spoke. That my mother sat with her hands folded and her face composed and said nothing. That my father eventually stood and walked to the window and stood with his back to the room. That Cassie pushed her chair back without a word and went to the restroom and didn't come back for 10 minutes. That my grandmother, in the silence, picked up her champagne glass and quietly, without ceremony, set it back down without toasting. And that Elaine, the neighbor, reached across the table and picked up the pages I had left there, unfolded them, and began, carefully, to read. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I drove anywhere. Not crying. Not shaking. Just sitting in the particular quiet that follows the end of something long. The restaurant light came through the windshield in a pale rectangle. Somewhere inside, 22 people were reconstructing their understanding of a family they thought they knew. I didn't need to be in there to feel it. Some things move through walls. Martin called at 8:47. Are you all right? He asked. Yes. I want you to know what happened after you left. He spoke carefully, the way he always did. Elaine read the document. Then she passed it to your Uncle Doug. He read it, folded it, and handed it back to her without saying anything. Your mother tried once to address the room. She said it was a family matter and that things had been misunderstood. Your Aunt Renee said, very quietly, that forging a signature was not a misunderstanding. Your mother did not respond to that. I pressed my head back against the headrest. Your father, Martin continued, said nothing for the remainder of the evening. He sat back down at the table and he didn't speak. The guests began leaving shortly after. By 9 o'clock, the room was empty except for your parents and Cassandra. And my grandmother? She stopped at your mother's table on her way out. She didn't raise her voice. She said, Sandra, I gave you 14 months to do the right thing. You chose not to. That's the last choice you make for this family. He paused. Then she left. I thought about my grandmother at 81. Still carrying that sentence inside her for over a year, waiting for the people she loved to choose differently. The particular grief of watching someone you love walk slowly toward a cliff you can see and they cannot. Thank you, Martin, I said. For being there. That's what witnesses do, he said simply. I drove home with the windows down, the way you drive when you need the air to be doing something while your mind catches up with the rest of you. The formal legal process began the following Monday. Martin had already filed the fraud dispute with the bank. Within 2 weeks, the bank opened an internal investigation. The forensic signature analysis, combined with the email chain, was sufficient for them to initiate the process of removing my name from the loan. It would take months to complete, these things always do, but the trajectory was clear. My credit file would be corrected. The collections activity against me would be suspended pending the outcome. The liability, when my name was removed from it, would fall where it had always belonged. On my parents. I want to be honest about what that meant. My parents were not wealthy people. My father had a pension and modest savings. My mother had never worked full-time outside the home. $214,000 was not an abstraction for them. It was the kind of number that reshapes a retirement. That forces decisions about a house, about savings, about what the next chapter of a life actually looks like. I had known this when I walked into Hargrove's. I had known it when I put those 3 pages on the table. I did not walk into that room to destroy my parents. I walked in because the alternative, absorbing $214,000 of debt and the 41-point drop on my credit score and the quiet, complete erasure of 6 years of careful work, was something I was no longer willing to do. Grace and victory means choosing what to keep and what to let go. It does not mean pretending the victory didn't cost anyone anything. 3 weeks after the dinner, my father called. I answered. He didn't have a speech prepared. I could tell immediately. There was none of the composure my mother brought to difficult conversations, none of the framing and maneuvering. Just a man's voice, flat and tired, without the architecture that usually held it up. I need you to know that I knew, he said. I knew before it happened and I didn't stop it. I have been trying for 3 weeks to find a way to tell you that isn't what it is, and there isn't one. I didn't say anything. I let him continue. Your mother believed she was helping Cassie. And he stopped. Started again. I told myself it was a loan. That we'd fix it before it became a problem. That you'd never need to know. He exhaled. I have been telling myself things like that for a long time. I know, I said. I'm sorry, Nora. I am genuinely, completely sorry. I believed him. That was the complicated part. I believed that my father was sorry. I also knew that sorry, on its own, was not the same as changed. That a man could be genuinely sorry and still have sat in a car outside a bank while his wife forged his daughter's name. That sorrow and accountability were not the same currency. I hear you, Dad, I said. I need time. I know. But I want you to understand something. I kept my voice even. The reason you were able to do this, the reason it felt available to you, is because you've been treating my name and my resources as the family backup plan my entire life. This was just the version that required a pen. A long silence. I know that too, he said. We stayed on the line for another minute without speaking. Then I told him I'd call him in a few weeks. He said okay. He said he loved me. I said I knew. I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a while, looking at nothing. Cassie took longer. For the first month after the dinner, she said nothing. No call, no text, no message through our mother. The silence was different from my father's, less like guilt and more like someone waiting to see which way the wind settled before choosing a direction. Then, 6 weeks out, a text. Short. No greeting. I didn't know they were going to use your name. I want you to know that. I read it 3 times. I thought about what I knew and what I couldn't prove. I thought about the fact that $220,000 had been deposited into an account in Cassie's name, that she had spent every dollar of it, that the boutique had operated for over a year before it closed, and that in 31 months, she had never once called to tell me what her store was built on. I didn't know is not the same as I couldn't have known. And I couldn't have known is not the same as I looked away. I typed back, I believe you didn't sign anything. I'm not sure I believe you had no idea. But I'm not going to argue about it right now. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, that's fair. It was the most honest thing my sister had ever said to me. 2 words, and they cost her something. I could feel it, even through a screen. We didn't speak again for several weeks after that. But something had shifted between us, not repaired, not forgiven, just honest. For the first time in our lives, we were standing in the same reality instead of the 2 separate ones our family had constructed. That was a start. It wasn't enough. But it was the first true thing we'd shared in a long time. In April, my grandmother had Martin formalize a change to her estate documents. She had been considering it, she told me, for over a year. I'm not going to share the details here because they're private and because the point isn't the money. The point is what she said when she told me. I should have done this differently, she said. I spent 14 months trying to protect everyone at once. Your parents, your sister, you. And the only person I ended up failing was the one person who deserved protecting most. She paused. I've spent a long time believing that keeping a family together meant keeping everyone comfortable. I think your mother taught me that. I think I let her. Grandma, let me finish. Her voice was firm. The bravest thing you did at that dinner was not the document. It was walking in at all. After everything. You still showed up. That's not something everyone can do. I thought about my mother's invitation. Don't bring up anything difficult. And then the 34 years before it. Tonight is about your sister. She can manage. She would want to help. I thought about showing up anyway. Not for them. For the truth. I learned it from you, I said. She made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Then we're even, she said. By summer, the bank's investigation was complete. My name was formally removed from the loan. The fraud finding was documented. My credit file was corrected and the 41-point drop reversed. The collections activity was closed. The liability transferred entirely to my parents. They hired their own attorney. They were making arrangements. It was going to be hard for them. I knew that and I sat with it honestly, the knowledge that accountability has a weight, and that weight was now sitting where it had always belonged. My credit score, the morning after the correction processed, was 4 points higher than it had been before any of this started. 6 years of careful work, intact. I went for a run that morning. The long route, through the park, past the river, back along the ridge where you can see the whole city laid out below you in the early light. It was June and warm and everything was green. I ran until my lungs ached and my legs were tired and my mind was finally, completely quiet. Then I went home and made coffee and sat at my kitchen table and thought about what I wanted the next year to look like. Not what my family needed from me. Not what the situation required. What I wanted. It was the first time I had asked myself that question without immediately hearing my mother's voice underneath it, redirecting me towards someone else's answer. My name is Nora Whitfield. I am 34 years old. I am a licensed CPA with a firm in Harlow. I have a small apartment, a savings account, and a running habit. I have a grandmother who kept a 37-page folder for 14 months because she believed, even when the evidence argued against it, that the people she loved were better than what they were doing. I have a father who sat in a car outside a bank and has been paying for it every day since the night I walked out of Hargrove's. I have a mother who is learning, slowly and at considerable cost, that organizing a family is not the same as loving one. I have a sister who sent me 2 words that told the truth, and who I am not ready to trust yet, but who I am willing to watch. I have a lawyer who understands that the most important thing a witness can do is refuse to look away. And I have a life that belongs entirely to me, not because it was given to me, not because anyone in my family built it, but because I built it quietly and carefully and without asking permission, in the margins of a family that had decided I didn't need much. They were wrong about that. I needed exactly as much as anyone else. I just learned early how to find it without their help. Here is the thing I want to leave you with, because I've spent a long time trying to say it correctly and I think the simplest version is the truest one. The people who love you are not always the people who protect you. Sometimes the people who love you are the people who have decided, without realizing it or examining it, that your resilience is a resource. That your capacity to absorb difficulty means you don't need to be shielded from it. That the fact that you keep going is proof that nothing important was taken. That is not love. That is convenience dressed up as confidence in you. You are allowed to name the difference. You are allowed to put a document on a table at a family dinner and say, "This happened, and it has my name on it, and I am done carrying it alone." You are allowed to walk out of a room without running. Without screaming. Without giving anyone the satisfaction of watching you break. And you are allowed, on an ordinary Tuesday in February, to open a letter that tells you your life has been used without your permission, and decide that it is the last time. That Tuesday cost me a lot. It cost me a version of my family I had spent my whole life trying to believe in. It cost me the comfort of pretending that the imbalances I had lived with were just the way families were, rather than choices people made and kept making because nobody had made them stop. What it gave me back was something I hadn't realized was missing. My own name. Clean and clear and entirely mine. I didn't know what to do with that at first. I do now. I use it carefully. I protect it. And I will never again let anyone sign it without asking. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.